Hey there, Thomas from Bricks here. In this video, we are going to explore the pop-up builder in Bricks together, which we introduced in version 1.6 alongside of another new and really cool feature, which is the interactions in Bricks. Now, we're going to use some interactions, just some very basic ones to show you because they're really interconnected with the whole pop-up builder functionality, but they're much more powerful. You can do much more things here using this new interactions feature. So definitely make sure to check out the Bricks Academy as always, going over this pop-up builder article, but also over the article that we have here for the new interactions feature in Bricks 1.6. Now, in this video, I think what we're going to do first is just having a look at a template, a pop-up template, because that's really what a pop-up is. It's just a different template type in Bricks. That I already created quickly here to show you an example, and then we're gonna create another pop-up from scratch together. All right, let's just jump onto my demo page here. You can see there's nothing fancy on this page, and the pop-up is already my HTML. If you would inspect the HTML, you could see the pop-up HTML. Now, by default, the pop-up, it's not gonna show, right? There needs to be a trigger, so this is where our interactions come in. And the interaction that I set up for this pop-up is one that's so-called whenever the mouse is leaving the browser window, we want to show our pop-up. So let's just trigger this by going with our mouse cursor here outside of our browser window. And as you can see, we have this little like heartbeat animation, and this is the trigger that I've set for this animation, for this interaction. Now, in order to close a pop-up, by default, this is already built in Bricks. So whenever the user is pressing escape, or by clicking outside of the pop-up content on the overlay, it's going to close the pop-up. So let's just click outside, and you can see the pop-up has been closed. If I go outside again of the browser window with my mouse, you can see that the pop-up shows up again. Now, of course, you can limit this. We'll later explore in the video as well the different ways how you can define different limits for your pop-up. But I want to show you first this close button here, because you might think this is something that Bricks already ships with, which is not the case. This is actually part of our pop-up template that we created. This is just an icon element, and it has two interactions set on it. The first interaction is the one on hover. So when I hover with my mouse over this icon, I'm gonna run an animation. I think it's called ta-da. So that's what it's doing, ta-da. And then there's another interaction, a second interaction. You can set as many as you want on an element, which is a click and interaction. So whenever I click on this icon, and then it's hooked up to our pop-up. So whenever I click this close icon, it's closing the pop-up. As you can see, I clicked it, and that's how it's closed. This is nothing that Bricks ships with. This is something that you can set up, as always, in typical Bricks fashion, fully customizable. All right, let's just maybe jump into the pop-up builder here. So let's just switch the tab. So we're now inside of our pop-up that we just saw on the front end, and this is how it's being created. It's a section with a container. This is our close icon here, and then we have three elements, which you can ignore. They're just here to show you that we put some elements onto this page. You can design them in the exact same way that you design any page or template, just by dragging your elements onto the canvas here. Okay. This is a little bit special here, this icon that I have, because first of all, it's a global element, because I'm going to use this on all of my pop-ups. So I don't need to design this from scratch for every pop-up, and then it might look different at some point, but it's a global element, so I can use this on any pop-up here. And then you can also see that this close icon has an interaction set. As you can see here, this little, like I said, we're gonna cover a part also of the interactions here, so bear with me. I think it all makes sense at the end of this video. We can see how everything really fits together. Now, you can see here this little indicator icon. If you hover over it, it says interactions, and in the same way, also it looks and functions pretty similar also to our element conditions that we have here, right? So you can also see that interactions are available here inside of the panel. If an element has an interaction, it's also going to be highlighted up here using the same accent color. And then if you click on it, you can open up the interactions interface. And what we saw on the front end, the click event to close the pop-up is defined here. So this is the selector that's basically gonna catch any pop-up. So I don't need to specify a certain pop-up ID. This is gonna make sure, because every pop-up is gonna have this brx pop-up clause, it's gonna close all of my pop-ups on the page. And then the second interaction, this little tada, whenever you hovered with the mouse over this close icon here, remember on the front end, it's gonna run this animation. So if we go back to the front end, let's just bring it up again. This is the hover interaction, and when I click on it, we close the pop-up. And this is basically the logic behind those two interactions. But yeah, there's much more you can do. Focus maybe on a certain input, on blur. When the mouse enters a specific, when the mouse enters this element, when this element enters the viewport, when it leaves the viewport, and yeah, all kinds of also browser and window events as well for your interaction triggers. All right, so this is the pop-up that we already have. Now I want to make sure this is not going to show up anymore. So what I'm going to do, because it's a template, remember, I can just go here to my settings, template settings. And right now I'm showing this pop-up on my entire website. And I actually want to make sure that it's not in use anymore. So I'm just gonna simply clear my template conditions. Now this pop-up, let's just save it. It's not gonna show anywhere on my website anymore. So if we go to the front end again, and let's just maybe reload this page. And then if I would make sure that my mouse is leaving the browser, you can see that it's no longer being triggered. Okay, so this pop-up basically is not in use anymore. It's also not rendered in the HTML because it doesn't have any template condition defined. All right, let's create a new template. So I'm gonna click here on create template inside of the builder. Of course, you can also do this inside of the WordPress dashboard, right? So I'm gonna call this my first pop-up. And then it's very important that, or essential, necessary, required, that you click on the pop-up template type, right? Because we need to tell Bricks what sort of template we want to edit later. Then we click on create. And then we're gonna click on edit. And then we're gonna start designing our first pop-up template from scratch. The first thing that you will notice once you edit a pop-up template is that you can see the design looks a little bit different. So because on the front end we have this pop-up overlay, which we can also style. So there are different ways actually to style the pop-up. Maybe let's just have a quick look before we head onto the canvas. So let's just go to settings and then the template settings. And here you can see a control group called pop-up. In the same way also when you edit the header, remember when you edit the header template, it's going to show you the header control group. Because we're editing a pop-up, we also have specific controls for this template type. If you open it up, you can here see there's a bunch of controls for our overlay. So if we want to change the background, maybe to use this color here, this pink color, then this is basically what's going to be used. Right, let's just clear it. I actually don't want to use this. Or if you want to make it transparent so it doesn't have any background color, you can just reduce the alpha level here to 0, and then it's going to be fully transparent, right? But let's just clear this. I want to stick with the default. The content itself, that's what's in here. Let me actually start to add some content so you can see the default width of the pop-up content. So if I click here on section, I now have a section in the container, and you can see that the default width that's actually going to be used for the pop-up content is the same width that we have defined for our container. So if you have a container width of 800 pixel, this would use 800 pixel. I think I'm on the default of 1100, so this is what's going to be used by default. You can make this smaller here. If I want to change the content width to 600, I can do it like this. If I want to have it 100%, I can do the same thing here. Let's just do 600. I don't need it so big. You could define a box shadow. So let's just say I do something like this. Now I would have this box shadow on my pop-up content. Okay, that looks good. Now further down here, we can actually limit how often we want to show this pop-up. If you hover over the label, you can also see actually the key that's being stored on, like inside of your browser storage. So this is an entry on the window. per session is using the session storage and the cross sessions is using the local storage. So if you inspect the page and you're familiar with those, I'm sure you can also quickly inspect them and see what's going on there as well. But basically every time the pop-up shows, the counter would increase here. So let's just say I want to only run this once per page load. I can just set this to 1. Now, if this is a global pop-up, I would probably not set this per page load, because then every time you switch, you visit a different page in the same tab, it's going to show up this pop-up, which I don't want. So I would probably set this on a live site 2 per session, or maybe even 2 across sessions, depending really how often you want to show your pop-up. But let's just maybe actually clear this for now, just to make sure that we can see our pop-up when we keep reloading the front end. And now I also need to tell Bricks, by defining an interaction that actually triggers the pop-up, because by default, remember, the pop-up is not going to show on the front end. I need to trigger this somehow. The most basic example would be if once the content is loaded, I'm going to show my pop-up. I can also do a little delay here. So let's just say 2 seconds after the content has been loaded, I want to show an element. And what do I want to show? Because I'm editing my pop-up, I could just say target itself. To be a bit more explicit, you can say here, target pop-up, and which pop-up? My first pop-up, which is the one that we are currently editing, remember? So then we even have interaction conditions. This is a little bit more complex. It's also working with browser storage when you can define some additional checks. So the interaction would only run when this is fulfilled. I'm not going to go into any detail here. We're not going to cover this in this introduction video. Is a little bit more advanced as a feature, so you can just ignore this for now. But it's explained in the Bricks Academy. All right, so this is set up. Let's actually maybe quickly put in an element. So let's just add a heading, a button. Make sure it's centered. The button itself, will actually make this our close button. So you can see how we can set an interaction on the button. So we got our pop-up styled. We got our elements inside of our pop-up. We got our pop-up interaction. So whenever the content is loaded, 2 seconds later, we want to show our pop-up. Now, what's missing is the template condition, because we also need to tell Bricks on which pages we actually want to show this pop-up, right? I'm gonna, again, just simply select entire website, and then we're gonna hit save. All right, let's jump to the front end. Let's reload our page, and what I would expect now, that is 2 seconds after the content has been loaded, the pop-up should just show. It's not gonna fade in or anything. We haven't set an animation. We just simply said, show us the pop-up. So I'm gonna reload. So it's loading. Now 1, 2, and you can see now my pop-up shows. I haven't set anything on my button here yet, so there's nothing happening when I click on it, obviously. But like I said, the default close event listeners are on the escape key. So whenever I press escape, like I'm doing now here, I'm gonna press escape. The pop-up will close. Let's just reload the page to show it again. After 1, 2, I can also click outside of the content on the overlay, which is also going to close our pop-up. Now, what we can do here is to set up an interaction on this button. So this is going to be my close button here as well. I want to make sure the user also has like an explicit way to close the pop-up. Maybe it's not clear over the escape key or by clicking on the overlay, or maybe the entire pop-up is covering the entire screen here, the content. Then you definitely need to have some explicit close button. So in my case now, I got my button here, and I'm gonna set an interaction. And the way to do this is just to go up here, click on interactions, and then you click on add. You can see the interface here is very familiar to our element conditions. Let's click on add, and then I'm gonna say whenever I click on this button, right, this is the trigger for our interaction. So when someone clicks on the button, what do I want to happen as the action for the button? I want to hide an element. And what do I want to hide? I want to hide a pop-up. And which one? My first pop-up. Okay. Now let's save our pop-up template. Let's reload. Again, once the content is loaded, 1, 2, my pop-up shows. And because now I have set my interaction, whenever I click on the button, remember, we want to hide an element and we want to hide this pop-up. So when I click here now, what I would expect is that my pop-up closes. So I click here and you can see that my pop-up closed. Now, one thing, just a little bit of a tip here, what you can do with this kind of close elements is that by default, it's just gonna use whatever is the default cursor here. So what I would probably do for the button itself, let's just click on the interactions to go back to our style. Styling controls, I would go here to layout and then under, if you scroll a little bit down, you can see the cursor setting and I would set this probably to pointer. This is also a new control added in Bricks 1.6. So now it's set to pointer, let's save. And let's reload. Okay. Now I hover over my close icon and you can see now it's using the cursor, the pointer as the cursor here. Another thing that I quickly wanted to cover, which is also explained in the Pop-Up Builder Academy article, I believe, is using the pop-up limit, also something we can quickly test just to show you. But what I want to show you is how you can use the element conditions. So if you've been using Bricks for a while, this is also a feature that we actually introduced in Bricks 1.5.4. Element conditions allow you to render an element when certain conditions are fulfilled. So you can actually hook this up with your pop-up. So let's just say you want to show a pop-up. Maybe you have like a special offer that's only available until a certain date. Maybe like a Black Friday, Cyber Monday, anniversary offer, whatever offer you have. Just as an example, you could create an element condition, as you can see here, inside of the pop-up, simply by adding it to the outermost element. Because if it's not fulfilled, none of the elements that I have here inside of my pop-up template are going to be rendered, meaning the template will not be triggered. Let me jump into the builder to just quickly show you that one as well. That's why in general, it can be also a good approach to just always have like some sort of wrapper element around all of your other pop-up content elements. Not really necessary if you don't work with element conditions on the pop-up. It's not needed, but it makes it definitely easier when you work with element conditions, because then you can just set one condition on the outermost element and everything else inside. It's not going to be rendered if the condition is not fulfilled. Okay, so let's go to conditions. Let's create one. And let's just say I want to show this pop-up if the user is logged out. So what this means now, because we are logged in, we are editing this pop-up, so of course we are logged in, meaning now for me, in my case, because I'm logged in, I'm not going to see this pop-up on the front end. Only guests on my website that are not logged in are going to see this pop-up. So let's just save this condition here. Okay, now let's go back to the front end and we're gonna reload this page. And 2 seconds after the content has been loaded, remember this was our interaction that we set up for the pop-up, it should show. But because of the element condition, which is not gonna be met because we are logged in and we only want to show this when the user is logged out, we should not see our pop-up anymore. So let's just reload. 1, 2, and as you can see, it's not loaded. Now, if we change this to logged in, now we're gonna show this pop-up only to visitors that are actually logged in. Now we should see it again because the condition has is gonna be met, right? So let's reload. and it's reload, 1, 2, and you can see that our pop-up shows. So this is how you can also work with element conditions inside of a pop-up template. Now, the last example that we can explore is the pop-up limit. So I'm gonna give you another, let's maybe clear this condition is not really necessary because we already illustrated this, just to keep everything nice and clean. Pop-up limit, let's jump into our settings and then our template settings pop-up. Scroll a little bit down, and then we're gonna set this to, well, the content loaded is not a good trigger now because I wanna trigger it. Actually, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna hook up our template here with the button that we have here, like this little button, right? Which right now, it's not doing anything, I click it. But let's hook it up with our template. This is gonna be pretty cool. So first of all, we're gonna say we wanna show this pop-up 3 times per page load. So it's gonna, even if you trigger it 10 times, it's just only gonna show up the first 3 times. After that, the interaction is not gonna be triggered for this pop-up because we already reached the limit, right? Okay, so this is set. Now, let me jump to my page. So this is the test page that we viewed on the front end. And let's go to our button. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to set up an interaction, add, and then I want to trigger my pop-up whenever we click on this button. So I'm going to do trigger click. What do I want to do? I want to show target pop-up. Which one? I probably have to reload actually because this page was already open when the template was not created, I believe. Yeah, probably. All right, let's quickly reload. Okay, let's jump into our interaction again. Okay, now we got our first pop-up. Okay, so whenever I click now this button, it should show the pop-up. Let's save it. But only 3 times maximum, right? So let's go to the front end. Let's reload. Now the counter will go to 1. This is the first time that we see our pop-up, right? 2 seconds after the content has been loaded. Let's close it. Now if we click on the button, what I expect now is that my pop-up shows for the 2nd time. As you can see, it shows for the 2nd time. Now let's close it by clicking outside of the pop-up content. Okay, now the counter is at 2, and let's just show it the 3rd time. Okay, this is the 3rd time we saw it. Let's close it. Let's click again. And as you can see, it's not opening anymore. And this is because now we basically hit our pop-up limit that we just set up here. All right, this is also how you can use the pop-up limit inside of the pop-up template editor. I think one thing I forgot to mention is that you can also use the theme styles to style your pop-ups globally. If you work with a lot of different pop-ups and you maybe want to have the same background color or remove the background color everywhere or just arrange it in a different way, you can also go to settings, theme styles, and then you will see that you will have this pop-up control group inside of the theme styles as well, allowing you to globally style your pop-up overlay and then also the content inside of your pop-up. Same also goes actually for the pop-up limits. All right, that's everything in terms of the pop-up builder. Of course, there's more to explore, so definitely check out the Academy articles as well. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this new feature on Bricks. Catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.